Thank you everybody for being here tonight. Some of you have been with us through the entire series and we certainly appreciate that. Thank you, Duane, for being here once again and sharing great history with everybody. We are up to over 400 people that are registered for this event, and we've been averaging about 100 folks per viewing, so that is fantastic. Just a reminder that we are recording this session, and we have recorded all of them. You can find them all at crestedbuttemuseum.com. You'll find them on our homepage. If you just scroll down a little bit and look in the right-hand column, you'll be able to find the whole list there from day one. Please consider making a donation to support this program. It also goes towards a scholarship, Duane Vandenbusche Education Scholarship for a local student to help them go to college. So again, you can make a donation at crestedbuttemuseum.com and you'll find the donations page there. We want to mention as well that the Crested Butte Film Festival is showing 2 historic films that everyone here will be very interested in. The first is Born from Junk, all about the history of mountain biking, the start of the clunker and its role in Crested Butte by Buttery Agency, and that will be shown in the virtual film festival. The other one is High Country by Red Lady Films, and it's all about the mid-timers. So everybody that came in the 60s and the 70s and really impacted the change to become the town that we are now. Again, that's a virtual film festival. It's at cbfilmfest.org, cbfilmfest.org, to get tickets and to check out the schedule. And I'm sure you can find trailers for both of those there as well. Finally, I am doing this from home today. So usually I have 2 computers where I can review questions during the slideshow and run the slideshow on the other computer. So tonight I've only got 1 computer with me and I won't be able to answer questions during the slideshow. So if anybody in the audience can answer questions and help folks out, please do, because I won't be there. Other than that, Duane, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Nell. Well, today we're going to be talking about skiing in the Gunnison Country, and we've got a great prize. The Monarch ski area has come through again. Dan Bender, the marketing guy, has provided 2 free day tickets to the Monarch ski area to be used at any time this year. And the trivia question will come after the talk today. So whoever is first to answer that question successfully, 2 free tickets to Monarch. I want to thank everybody for being on board. As Nell said, we've got over 400 registered right now, and that's fantastic, and I really appreciate it. Next week, we will be talking about Taylor Park and Aspen, which is right next to Taylor Park, and Aspen, the #1 silver town in the world for about a decade. So it ought to be pretty exciting next week. If any area in the United States was made for skiing, the Gunnison Country was. This area has high mountains going over to 14,000 feet in elevation, more than 300 inches of snow per year, light powder, isolation, and in the early days, it forced people to be able to ski to get around. The locals used to tell me that the only crop that never failed in the Gunnison Country was snow. And in the history of the Gunnison Country, there were 11 ski areas that had lifts on them, whether they be rope tow or chair lifts or whatever, gondolas or whatever. The earliest skiing was done in the 1860s by missionaries bringing religion to the placer miners. Father John Franklin Dyer was a man in 1861 who skied into Minersville at the head of Washington Gulch, about 7 miles north of Crested Butte. And he preached there to 250 miners in a mining camp that they call Minersville. His route on skis, if you can believe it, took him from Granite on the Arkansas River on the east slope, over Lake Pass on the north end of Taylor Park, down into Spring Creek, then Cement Creek, then the East River Valley, and finally up Washington Gulch to Minersville. He would later on write about his experiences in a great book called The Snowshoe Itinerant, which is out of print today, but if you get on Amazon or Zoom, you can get it. George Darley, a Presbyterian minister, built the oldest church on the western slope of Colorado in Lake City. in 1877. It's still there, and they still have services every Sunday. He often skied from Lake City over Engineer or Cinnamon passes to bring religion to mining camps on the other side of the mountains. And he, like Dyer, wrote about his experiences in a great book called Pioneering in the San Juan. When gold and silver mines opened in the Gunnison Country in the late 1870s, thousands flocked in. Many of the early miners were from Scandinavia and Canada, and they introduced the sport of snowshoeing or skiing. What we call skiing today was called snowshoeing then. What we call snowshoes today were called Canadian webs then. Skis were handmade out of spruce, and they were made out of spruce because hardwoods were unattainable at that time. Now, the guy that we're looking at, these are people skiing in Irwin in 1883, and I want you to pay particular attention to the guy in front. He's a 16, well, at that time, he'd be about 14 years old, and that guy is Charlie Bainey from Crested Butte. And they're all skiing. You probably are finishing a ski race in Irwin in 1883. The big tips of the skis were boiled in camp kettles and then curled upward in racks. The skis were 9 to 14 feet long, 4.5 inches wide, and they weighed 8 pounds. You got a good look at them right there. They had a leather toe piece, a 4-inch block of wood for a heel piece, where your heel could come up, but obviously could not go back. And then they had beeswax, or dope as it was called at that time, on the bottom. And everybody had a guide pole 7 to 9 feet long. And that was used as a support and a brake, and to help pull you forward where you are on level snow. And the only way to turn, if anybody ever turned, and they didn't turn very much, was to use the Telemark turn, which was a lunge forward with one ski, and then you swung that guide pole around, you made a long looping turn. In reality, there was very little turning. To avoid crashing into boulders or trees, the skier often had to leap off the skis into over-the-head snow. And the skis were stopped from going to oblivion by lanyards or leather tied to the skier's belt. One skier in the Gunnison Country in the early days said, and I'm quoting, "I would say to those who are about to make their first attempt at riding shoes that the one quality to have is confidence. They must at least feel some security. What is needed is conceit. A little of this gives the courage one needs and smooths the way to success." In 1881, the great New York reporter Nellie Bly came to Irwin to report on a booming mining camp for her paper. She was the one who went around the world in 80 days. And she hadn't been on skis before, and when newspaper editor of the Elk Mountain Pilot, John E. Phillips, and a number of people took her out to ski, Nellie Bly upset, head first in the snow, skis right up above her. When they got her untangled and upright, everybody was laughing, and Nellie Bly wasn't amused at being laughed at by a bunch of hicks in a mining town. And she walked up to Johnny Phillips, put her finger under his nose and said, "Sir, it's pretty obvious to me that you are no gentleman." And Johnny Phillips was equal to the task. And he said, "Madam, after seeing you with your feet straight up in the air and your head down, it is also obvious to us that you are no gentleman." To get to the booming mining camp of Irwin early in the year as spring dawned, packers would leave King's Ranch near the head of Ohio Creek, about 15 miles away, with 100 pounds of supplies on their backs. They crossed 10,033-foot-high Ohio Pass, and they went into Irwin, making one trip on skis a day. They usually left at 2 o'clock in the morning when the snow was solid, and they charged $20 a trip, which was a lot of money for that time. Skiing was the only way to get around in those early days and was very dangerous in the high country. The heavy snows meant avalanche danger, and many a miner was killed in the White Death. 6 of them died in the 1880s trying to get from the Augusta mine in Poverty Gulch to Crested Butte. 3 miners survived the avalanche. Some of the 6 bodies were not recovered until snow melted in the late spring. Legendary mail carriers brought mail into the mining camps by horse in the summer and fall and by skiing the rest of the year. One of the most famous was a Canadian named Alex Parent of Tin Cup. From 1880 to 1918, Parent was the mail carrier from St. Elmo on the eastern slope all the way to Aspen on the western slope. His route took him from St. Elmo over 12,154-foot high Tin Cup Pass into Tin Cup, then 20 miles through Taylor Park, over 11,800-foot high Taylor Pass, down Express Creek into Ashcroft, and finally into Aspen. In the winter, it took Parent 3 days to make that very dangerous high altitude trip, and he did it for 38 years, a legend. Another mail carrier was Louis Barthel of Crested Butte, who carried the mail between that town and Irwin and Gothic. Once, Barthel had to carry a 5-gallon can of coal oil to Gothic on skis in the winter, and it made him mad. And on the next trip, when the men who ordered that coal oil had ordered a pair of hip boots to keep them dry in the Sylvanite mine, Barthel brought them in one at a time. One week and the next week, so he'd get even with the guy. The most famous mail carrier in the Rocky Mountains was Al Johnson of Crystal, who was acclaimed as the greatest snowshoer of the Rockies. Johnson was postmaster of Crystal, and he also owned a store in mines there. He was born and raised in the San Laurentian Mountains of French Quebec and Canada, and became a champion skier there, winning a lot of competitions. He and his brother Fred alternated carrying the mail between Crystal and Crested Butte in the 1880s, crossing by Emerald Lake, then 10,700-foot high Schofield Pass, and then down through the dangerous Crystal Canyon with its 17% grade and the feared Devil's Punch Bowls. When he got to the head of the canyon in the winter, he declared that to hopefully avoid avalanches, he turned his skis loose and shot through the dangerous canyon as quickly as possible. Very early during the boom days of mining in the 1880s, tour races were organized among the mining camps of the Gunnison Country. Races were held in Gunnison and Irwin, Crested Butte, Gothic, Crystal, and Marble. And there is a race in 1883, and that one is in Irwin with a guy named Beecher Bainey and Joseph Block. Now, Beecher Bainey's not Charlie Bainey, he's an uncle. But you can see the slope they're skiing at, and nothing is prepared, obviously. The snow is not prepared. The races were held before big crowds with up to $100 in prize money for the winner. That was a lot of money at that time. The greatest race ever in the Gunnison Country and in the state of Colorado and maybe the West occurred on Washington's birthday, February 22nd, 1886 in Crested Butte. A special Denver and Rio Grande train brought 1,000 people from Gunnison to watch. The course was set 525 yards long and just south of Crested Butte on the side of Gibson Ridge. The newspaper report declared, and I quote, "Concerning the details of the race, the intense excitement, and the great tension of mind and nerve, the half has not been told, and words simply fail to convey an adequate impression." All of the top skiers of the nearby mining camps were there, and after the heats were finished, 4 men stood on top of Gibson Ridge. They were winners of the last 4 heats, and they were ready to race down that steep course with no gates and unprepared snow. Down below, the excitement began to build with the huge crowd. Almost all had been drinking, and many had gambled on the top skier of their various mining camp. Each man on top turned away from each other to put his favorite dope or what passed for wax on their skis. A rifle shot from the starter at the starting line sent them on their way on a bright sunny day in the middle of a clear Colorado blue sky. The 4 men who roared down the ridge were Harry Cornwall, a mining engineer from Irwin, Albert Fish, also of Irwin, the great Al Johnson from Crystal, and a little-known 16-year-old boy named Charlie Bainey from Crested Butte. Bainey, the Crested Butte newspaper said, and I quote, "was almost raised on snowshoes, and for perfect control of his nerves and muscles, he could not be surpassed." The paper further reported, Both Johnson and Bainey had perfect shoes. They were smooth as glass and fairly glistened. The four men leaned forward and then, following the rifle shot down the steep slope as if from a cannon. The course was a 35-degree pitch, and the men picked up tremendous speed quickly. A roar went up from down below. Al Fish fell early in the race, and Harry Cornwall soon dropped behind. The race was now between Al Johnson and Charlie Bainey. Johnson took the lead immediately, but then Charlie Bainey, exclaimed the Crested Butte newspaper, quote, doubled himself up on his shoes and shot down the mountain like a speeding bullet. And I believe that Charlie Bainey had gone into the first racing tuck in history. When the two men flashed across the finish line at 60 miles an hour next to the huge and roaring crowd, Charlie Bainey was ahead of Al Johnson by a mere 18 inches. The newspaper reporter excitedly declared, the race was one of the most exciting ever seen in the Rockies, and we doubt as if its equal had occurred anywhere. Down at the finish line, bets were paid off, and then most of the crowd went into Crested Butte to drink beer and dance to polkas played by locals on their accordions. It had been a day never to be forgotten in the Colorado Rockies. 2 months later, in April of 1886, Gunnison snowshoe racers were asked what they thought of the barring of guide poles at the Silverton races in the San Juan Mountains. The Gunnison and Crested Butte racers said that the race must have been down an easy slope. One Crested Butte racer declared, our experts think they could find girls in Gunnison that could make a better race than those Silverton fellows boast of. Obviously not politically correct at the time. Many who did not ski in the Gunnison Country used toboggans. One visitor called Truthful James described his first toboggan run off Smelter Hill. Today that's called Cupola Hill, right above Mountaineer Bowl, which ran for a half-mile past Taylor Hall and right into downtown Gunnison. He said this, I sat down on the innocent-looking board on top of the hill. There was a handsome young woman sitting in front of me on the same board. Then an unfeeling brute shoved us off the top of the hill, and we fell, I think, 10,000 feet in 1 second. It don't take long to think if you are scared into it by the fear of death. I thought of everything I'd ever done that was wrong and everything I'd done right. I kept on thinking like a house on fire and shivering on an Arctic gale until we reached the level and went scooting across the prairie like an express train. Then I felt better. I saw life before me again. I yelled and shouted like mad. The tour races in the Gunnison Country went on until the mining boom faded by the late 1880s. The silver panic of 1893 turned the boom towns into ghost towns. Like the song's Four Strong Winds lamented, the good times were all gone and we're bound for moving on. However, Crested Butte, with its coal mines still operating full bore, was unaffected by the panic, and the young people there continued to ski, and they skied at Chicken Ranch a mile up the Slate River, Chocolate Peak at the west end of town, on Gibson Ridge, and on the flank of Mount Emmons. In Gunnison in 1923, 3 men had invented the first snowmobile in history that they hoped might be able to take skiers up to the tops of mountains. The thing had a propeller in the front, and it didn't work very well because any time you got in 6 inches of snow, it didn't have any power enough to pull forward. And if you got it on the flat with no snow, that propeller powered it in every which way. It wouldn't go straight. So a great invention went a-glimmering in 1923 in Gunnison, Stoplight Corner. That's where they produced it. Gunnison skiers often caught the Denver and Rio Grande train and rode to the top of Marshall Pass, where they got off and skied to switches along the tracks until the night train came by. Salida skiers did the same thing from the east side of Monarch Pass. On February the 13th, 1938, and you're looking at it right now, 407 skiers from Salida, sponsored by the Salida Ski Club, 110 from Gunnison, sponsored by the Gunnison Ski Club, took the train up to the top of Marshall Pass, the famous ski train. And there they skied down to the Chavano Switch. And the train would pick them up there. The engine would pick them up there and bring them back up to the top for a dime. And he got 3 runs. Other people tobogganed. A man called Willie the Porter played the accordion and people danced at the shed on top. And Thor Groswald and a Belgian skier named Count Dupuy gave lessons. It was a day never to be forgotten, and everybody dreamed maybe of a great ski area on top of Marshall Pass. Others from Salida, other skiers from Salida, caught the Rio Grande branch train as it came up the South Arkansas River to the town of Monarch, where a huge limestone quarry owned by the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company existed. Now there you got a great picture from Monarch. And these are posters that were painted by Jerry Story. You can get them at the Monarch ski area. And Dan Bender has told me they're also available at the Outpost at 123 North F Street in Salida. I got a bunch of copies of those and they're fantastic. So now these skiers caught that train, the branch train, and they skied on the steep hills right above the limestone quarry, and then they would catch the train back to Salida. Gunnison people and Western State College students found a great place to ski 8 miles south of Crested Butte and across some Cement Creek at a place called Quix Hill, owned by a rancher of the same name. And the Quix loved hosting the skiers. Coming up by bus or private car in the 1920s and 30s, skiers walked to the top of the hill and they got about a 400-foot vertical run. And you can see one of the guys walking up with his skis right now, having pressed down the snow with a whole bunch of skiers coming up from Highway 135. Some of the runs had jumps on them. During lunch, 4 or 5 of the top skiers hiked to the top of Red Mountain and skied the powder down to Quix Hill. And there you can see the Western State Hiking and Outing Club at Quix Hill, and they're ready to go and ski. One of the greatest skiers in Gunnison Country history, and maybe the greatest, honed his ski skills at Quix Hill. There's a great shot of a guy in a toboggan. That's Fred Brand. And Fred I talked with before he passed away. This is 1932. And he's on a toboggan. He's going about 35 miles an hour off a jump. He's wearing a flying helmet. The 2 guys back of him are scared as hell. And Fred said, we were always scared to go off that jump, but nobody wanted to be chicken. And there he is on the rise, about 10, 15 feet above the snow, 35 miles an hour, Quix Hill. The name of the great skier, and there's some of the Western State skiers playing Crack the Whip on the side of Quix Hill. I mean, that's dangerous in the playground. When you're holding hands, these guys are doing it on skis. I don't know how anybody avoided getting killed. The name of the great skier was Carl Easterly. Carl was born in 1920 and graduated from Gunnison High School in 1938. As a young boy, he rode the Western State bus to Quix Hill every weekend, and he became a phenomenal skier. Easterly then began to do something not done in the U.S. or anywhere around the world. He built jumps on the hill and began doing backflips. Unbelievable for that time. And there he is doing a backflip on Quix Hill. With the skis and the bindings of that time, that is almost unbelievable. Carl went off to Denver University and skied there for a year. And then he went to the Navy in World War II. After the war, he came to Sun Valley, Idaho, and performed in a movie called Sun Valley Skiers. Then, for an early TV program called You Asked For It, Easterly went to Sun Valley and was pulled by a helicopter at 35 miles an hour as he hung on to a rope about 100 feet behind. At 35 miles an hour, he did a backflip over a wooden fence, skied across a 50-yard long pond, and then did another backflip over another fence. I have the photos. Carl Easterly, maybe the best there ever was. When I always gave my slideshow and showed this photograph, I got 5 of them showing all the things I just described. And I would show them, and I would say, there's the guy who was the best there ever won. All you hot shots at Crested Butte, for his time, he's the best. And let's give him a standing ovation. And everybody would stand up and give him a standing ovation. The next morning, I would call Carl, now in his 90s, at Silverthorne, and say, Carl, I introduced you as the best there ever was. And you got another standing ovation, and he loved it. During this time, the 10th Mountain Ski Division trained at Camp Hale just off Battle Mountain near where Cooper Hill ski area is today. When these guys had leaves, they made their way into Aspen, slept on the floor of the Hotel Jerome, and skied on the side of Ajax or Aspen Mountain. To stay warm, they drank a thick chocolate milkshake spiked with 5 shots of bourbon, and they called it Aspen Crud. And nobody ever got cold after drinking that. And they also had a favorite song they sang, and it went like this. There are systems and theories of skiing, but one thing I surely have found, the skiing's just good in the winter, but the drinking's good all year round. During the winter of 1939 and 40, the Gunnison Ski Club took towers and cables from the old Blistered Horn silver mine near Cumberland Pass, not far from Tin Cup, and put in the first chairlift in Colorado history. In that year, other areas had lifts, but not chairs. Wolf Creek, Monarch, Winter Park, all had them, but not chairs. This is the first chairlift in Colorado. The Pioneer Ski Area was located 3 miles up Cement Creek, and there it is, 11 miles from Crested Butte. The chairlift that you can see was called the Comet, and the 3 runs were called the Big Dipper, the Little Dipper, and the Milky Way. And from top to bottom, one could ski 1,800 vertical feet. Now, very early, when they were putting in this chairlift, the Forest Service in the fall of the year came over and saw how high the chairs were off the ground. And they said, you guys got to lower those chairs. People fall out, they're going to get killed. And then 15 to 20 feet of snow fell. And now skiers in the chair began to get flipped out of the chair because there was so much snow that their knees were under their chin. And the Forest Service came in and said, you got to get those chairs up a little higher. People are going to get hurt. Well, the Forest Service didn't know a whole lot about ski areas at that time. Pioneer hosted intercollegiate ski races, closed during World War II, and then reopened during the winter of 46-47. The ski area was very steep for the primitive equipment of that time, and every one involved a fall-away turn. Now there you can see Crested Butte Mountain in the background, and there you see skiers heading off with primitive equipment, and you can see that that run is falling away to the right and is pretty darn steep. The Western States Ski Team, which began during the winter of 46-47, featured Olympian Crosby Perry Smith, who acted as the unofficial coach. And there he is in the back row, left in the back. The guy in the right front is Thor Groswald of the famous Groswald family of Winter Park. And that is the Western States Ski Team, the second year, 1947 and 48. Crosby's still alive today, lives in Denver, 95 years old, and he was the unofficial coach. Hubert Snyder, Dick Wellington, Len McLean were all members of that team. Pioneer lasted until the winter of 1951 and 52, when it became too dangerous and was replaced by Rosamond Hill. The chairlift went to the fledgling Monarch ski area. By 1949, Sven Wick had become the ski coach at Western State College, and there is Sven. Born in Sweden in 1921, he came to the U.S. in 1949, and in that year, despite not speaking English, he got the job at Western based on the fact that he had been an instructor in gymnastics and physical conditioning, as well as having been a member of the Swedish gymnastics demonstration team in the Olympic Games in 1948 in London. Wick's ski team trained at Pioneer, and also on Pershing Mine Hill and Crested Butte, where a short slalom course and ski jump had been built in 1951. And there is Lenny Krismanich going off the jump at Pershing Mine Hill, which is located right where the lower loop is today, right where the Pershing coal mine is or was. And in the background, those of you who mountain bike in the area, that is that area, that is that little cement foundation that they call the Gronk today. And that's on the lower loop. But neither Pioneer nor the Pershing Mine Hill were adequate for a college ski team. In 1950, Wick and his skiers found another possible area. And this one was on John Rosman's ranch, about 5 miles south of Crested Butte and paralleling Highway 135. Sven got approval from Rosman to develop a ski area there. 2 rope tows were put in with a 150-meter jump and jumping stand. Wick and members of the Western State ski team did all the work. Frank LaFaaye of the ski team was the man put in charge, and he got 12 hours of academic credit, all independent study from Western, for getting the ski area ready. Now go back to that previous picture of the car. That's how they ran the rope tow, from the back wheel of an automobile. Very primitive, but it worked. Rosman Hill was the scene of many great collegiate races, with great skiers like Buddy Werner and Dave Gorsuch running slalom gates and skiing a narrow and challenging downhill. Cars parked on the side of 135 and then for a quarter mile into John Rosman's ranch. And huge crowds were in attendance. Go back to that previous photo, Nell. And there you can see the cars piled up right next to Highway 135 on the Rosman Ranch, and you can't quite see it, but they're also parked on Highway 135. Big crowds. Then during the winter of 1961 and 2, a visionary from Kansas and the U.S. Air Force, Dick Eflin, along with his partner Fred Rice, began the Crested Butte ski area. Where you're looking at right there, ladies and gentlemen, is the warming house at the Rosman Hill ski area. Eflin and Rice bought the Molensic Ranch at the base of Crested Butte Mountain. They got Forest Service approval for a ski area with a J-bar and a T-bar, and they began operations during the winter of 61-62. And there it is. You can see the warming house. In the background, you can see the J-bar, and you can see, probably an early 60s Volkswagen in the front. This is very early in the game. They got a gondola in January of 1963, and Father Leo McKenna blessed the Italian gondola, which was the tradition in Italy. And there he is blessing the gondola, which then went 50 feet out of the shack and broke down for the rest of the day. Father McKenna then went into the parking lot, slipped and fractured his kneecap. I visited him at the hospital. I said, Father, I've been a good Catholic all my life, but after your demonstration today, I'm thinking of maybe going Lutheran. And we both had a big laugh. The Molensic Barn became the beer stoob. There is the gondola with 3 pairs of skis and the poles that could carry 3 people going up to the top of the mountain or near the top of the mountain. The Molensic Barn became the beer stoob. Cold beer, good-looking girls, great banjo music from a guy named Buck Kelly. And there it is. And had the deck, and boy, I mean, it was the place to be. And a ski patrolman named Jack Hudson would come in at the sweep when there was a lot more snow than that, and he would come right over the roof and land in the parking lot, and you could hear him on the roof. Roger Ramjet Evans and the Flying Bambini brothers in 1973 on T-Bar Hill. These are 10 skiers holding hands, going in the big dip on the left side of the T-Bar Hill as you're looking down, coming up on that lip, doing a backflip and landing it still holding hands. Tony Nipa, Rick Wood, Michael Grazier, Ramjet Evans, all members of that crew. And there you can see them upside down, and you can see the buildings in the background. The Flying Bambini brothers. The start of the Telemark Skiing again came as a result of Rick Borkovic, who wanted to ski in the backcountry. And he invented the Telemark turn again because that was the only way Rick could get up there on top of the hill with cross-country skis. Alpine touring gear hadn't been invented yet. And then they had Telemark races all over the place in the Gunnison Country and around the state of Colorado. Galande jumping became big, with big events held at the jump on the Three Seasons, Tower 7, Horseshoe, Houston. Go back to that previous photo, Nell. Before we get to the Galande jumping, there is Dick Eflin playing the guitar at the Steakhouse. And his wife Liz is in front on the right. And the guy on the left is Paul Johnson, who left and went to Vail and opened up the Tivoli. Dick passed away 2 years ago. Paul passed away a year ago. This is in the early 60s. Next photograph. There's Jerry and Sarah Davis, both Western States ski team members, on the top of the North Face in the early 1980s with Mount Akali in the background. The Galande jumping, which means you come off of a artificial hill or a regular ski jump, you got to be in a tucked position. Now, Ron Barr's listening tonight, and Ron Barr can probably tell you a lot more than me. But Paul Hitchcock, for a while, held the record at 229 feet, which has since been broken, but that's a long way to go on alpine skis. Yeah, Ron Barr is listening tonight. Michael Grazier, Tower 7, 1973, did the first successful triple backflip in history. In a Galande contest at Vail, Michael went 170 feet and did a backflip while doing it. And then there was the legend of Garth Hammond. Garth Hammond was a Western States student and is a real character. And during Flauschink in 1969, my two friends, Tom Prather and Bruce Bartleson, and I were skiing. And as part of the Flauschink celebration, they had a slalom course set on Jokerville. And Tom and Bruce went up, and I said, I'll grab our jackets. It was a warm day, and I'll work my way up. And as I worked my way up, a tremendous roar went up from a crowd of about 500 people. And as I got closer, I could see that the guy skiing the slalom gate was nude, Garth Hammond. And the guy behind him had his clothes, and he was like a Keystone Cops. He fell, and the clothes littered the hill. Well, to make a long story short, Garth Hammond was arrested. And he was put in the back of a sheriff's car and taken down to Gunnison. And on the way to Gunnison, he's in handcuffs in the back. And on the way to Gunnison, a call came to the sheriff that somebody had stolen the car and Gunnison was heading up towards Crested Butte. Be on the lookout. Well, around Jack's cabin in Kenny Span's field, the guy was coming up with the stolen car. Sheriff put his lights on. The guy rolled his car into the side of the ditch and ran into Ken Span's field. Garth Hammond said to the sheriff, who was in no condition to get the guy, you take those cuffs off me, I'll go get that guy for you. Sheriff did it. Garth Hammond got the guy. Now the guy is in handcuffs in the back of the car. Garth Hammond's riding shotgun. 2 days later, the Thursday newspaper, the Gunnison News Champion, came out. And the headline was, Local Hero Captures Car Thief. And not one word about Garth Hammond being nude skiing up at Crested Butte. Those were the way things went at that time. Flauschink, end of the ski season, started by Chuck Wirtz, Art Norris, and George Sibley. All kinds of celebrations went on. Polka dances. Pete Dundle later on was the polka man, still is today. And everybody would sing Springtime in the Rockies because it was in April. And I'm not going to sing it, but I'm going to give you some of the words. When it's springtime in the Rockies, I'm coming back to you, little sweetheart of the mountains, with your bonny eyes of blue. Once again I'll say I love you, while the birds sing all the day. When it's springtime in the Rockies far away. The second X Games in history were held at Crested Butte. First one, Snow Summit, California, 1997. Second and third, because of Gina Croft, the marketing head at Crested Butte, 1998 and 99. It would have been great if we could have hung on to them. They're pretty famous today. About 35 years ago, I finished skiing at Crested Butte, went into Tony's Tavern to have a beer and a hamburger and French fries, and the guy came in with a guitar and he said to Whitey, the bartender, would you mind if I sat down by the fireplace and strummed my guitar a little bit? And Whitey said, no, go ahead. In 15 minutes, the place was jammed. Crowd waiting to get in on the outside. And the guy was playing the guitar. I never forgot the line, some people say that there's a woman to blame, but I know it's my own damn fault. Jimmy Buffett, playing Margaritaville, played for 3 hours, free. I never left my seat, and nobody else did. Because of Sven Wick, Pioneer, Rosman, and Crested Butte, the Western ski team became legendary, competing against big schools like DU, CU, Utah, Vermont, New Mexico, Middlebury. In 1966, the NCAAs were held at Crested Butte, and Western finished second. Now get this is the CU team. Huga, Kidd, Savage, and Morrall. Western had 3 Olympians on its team also. And at that time, the top skiers in America, all the Olympians, were college skiers. Sven Wick turned out 12 Olympic skiers. And there he is. Go to that previous photo. Sven's weenie wagon has run out of gas. And they're pushing it into a town in Winter Park, I think Fraser. Sven turned out 12 Olympic skiers in alpine, Nordic combined, jumping, and biathlon. He became the U.S. Olympic coach at Squaw Valley in 1960, and he's considered to be the father of Nordic skiing in the U.S. today. And there he is at Roscoe Hill. And over his shoulder, you can't quite see the sign, but it says, tow tickets, $1. This is in the early 50s on Roscoe Hill. When he left Western in 1968, after 20 years, he went to Steamboat Springs and opened the Steamboat Nordic Center, still run by his family today. And there is the Western State team in front of Taylor Hall in the early 60s. Sven Wick on the left in the front. Dave Gorsuch, Olympian, holding poles in the middle front. Loris Werner, Olympian, holding the skis, second from the right. And Kenny Phelps in the back, right off of Sven's left shoulder, another Olympic skier. That's one of the great teams of all time. Sven was a great friend and as good a man as I ever met. And when I told him one time, I said, Sven, I always wanted to be like you as a professor and a person and a coach. And I said, Sven, I'm only halfway there, but I'm working on it. And of course, I know today that I never could really get there, but I'm still working on it. Women also began skiing at Western, and there's the women's team at 1977 at Red River, New Mexico, for the national meet. And there's Sven's daughter, Birgitta, on the left. She was coaching. Sherry Coos, Dolph Coos's daughter, is in the middle of the back row. All those girls were recruited by yours truly from Mount Hood and Montana, and most of them came out of the Northwest. Sherry was from Durango. The great days of skiing when it exploded were the 1960s and 70s, and was highlighted by a famous song called Super Skier, which went something like this. Well, they call him Super Skier as he sat around the sun deck and swore that he'd never take a spill. But when they finally took him down, they had to use 3 toboggans to carry all the pieces down the hill. Well, he was slipping down that slope going 90 miles an hour when a mogul flipped him into the air. His jumping form was fine until he ran into that pine, and 2 one-legged skiers went from there. One ski was going east and the other was going west, and both of them were ever running clear. And the folks on Little Nell looked up scared as hell. It's a bird, it's a plane, it's Super Skier. Crested Butte became a famous ski area because some of the first and best extreme skiing of any ski area in the world was there. The head wall, the North Face, the Banana, Dead Bob's, Body Bag Chute, and Phoenix and Akali Bowl. It also has maintained its identity and character and still kind of known as the last great ski town. The Gunnison Country has had a great tradition and history in skiing. Many reminisce about a great era during the 60s and 70s in a poem by Eugene Field of the Denver Post, who longed about the great days of a mining camp called Gold Hill above Boulder. He returned to the camp after a 20-year absence, only to find out that the boom there had busted. He lamented, as many old-time skiers lament today. Oh, them days on Red Hoss Mountain, when the skies was fair and blue, when the money flowed like liquor, and the folks was brave and true, when the nights was crisp and balmy, and the camp was all astir, with the joints all throwed wide open, and no sheriff to demur. Oh, them days on Red Hoss Mountain, in the Rockies far away, there's no such place nor times like them as I can find today. You're looking at Dick Mize, one of the great Nordic skiers ever for Western State, skiing around Crested Butte. So, skiing in the Gunnison Country, champagne powder, clear blue skies, high elevation, magnificent mountain terrain, polka music, cold beer, and a tradition of over 140 years. May it live on forever.